Racist officer lies under oath, not knowing the black woman is his boss at Homeland Security. You won't believe what happens when a twisted web of deceit leads a prejudiced police officer into a courtroom, only to discover that the very black woman he tried to frame is actually his powerful boss at the Department of Homeland Security. In a case brimming with hidden agendas, spine-tingling tension, and explosive confrontations, a single testimony ignites a chain reaction that puts careers at stake and lives at risk. As buried truths come roaring to the surface, one man's bigotry sets him on a collision course with a reckoning he never saw coming. Get ready for a roller coaster of drama, vengeance, and redemption. Officer Raymond Ray Phillips prided himself on his ability to read people within seconds. As a patroller in the Riverbend Police Department for over 15 years, he believed his instincts were infallible. Riverbend was a medium-sized city, big enough to face major crime, but small enough that personal biases could become woven into everyday policing. Ray had grown cynical over time, and his biases, especially toward black communities, were well known around the precinct, though seldom addressed openly. On a sweltering Monday afternoon, Ray found himself assigned to patrol the Cedar Heights district. The neighborhood had a mix of old Victorian houses, run-down apartment complexes, and newly built condominiums. It was also predominantly black, a fact that irritated Ray for reasons he'd never admit out loud. He rolled his squad car down Elm Street with the windows cracked, letting in a warm breeze that did nothing to stifle his annoyance. That was when he spotted her, an elegant, confident black woman stepping out of a black SUV with tinted windows. Her posture was perfect, and she wore a crisp navy blue suit. Her hair was neatly braided, and she walked with a purpose that demanded respect. Something about her aura set Ray on edge. She looked important, certainly more important than the typical civilian he saw in this neighborhood. Instead of minding his own business, Ray's prejudices kicked in. What's she doing around here? Probably lost. Or up to something. His mind buzzed with assumptions. He flicked on his patrol lights and pulled over near the curb. He watched her from a distance for a moment, then exited his cruiser and approached her, every step laced with suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am," Ray said sharply, hand hovering above his belt, as though he expected trouble. "I need to see some ID." The woman turned, her expression composed yet puzzled by the abrupt demand. Up close, Ray could see she had a subtle, understated authority about her. She didn't look like a typical civil servant, more like an executive or high-ranking official, but for Ray, that only served to rile him further. Who does she think she is, strutting around here like she owns the place? "Is there a reason you need my ID, officer?" she replied calmly, though her tone carried an undercurrent of quiet displeasure. Ray pressed on. "Yes, there is. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. You fit a description." His words were laced with deception, but he delivered them confidently. In truth, he had no such report. He simply wanted to assert dominance, to teach this woman that in his jurisdiction he called the shots. She arched an eyebrow. "A description? And what might that be?" He hesitated. He hadn't planned on being challenged. Dark suit, black SUV, approaching private property without apparent reason. His own reasons sounded flimsy, even to him, but he refused to back down. "Let me see your ID, now." She studied him for a second that felt like an eternity. Then, with a slight shrug, she reached into her inside pocket. She pulled out her wallet and presented her driver's license. Ray scanned it, not even taking in the details, because he was too focused on his preconceived notions. Her name was Naomi Davenport. The license confirmed her local address, but nothing else. Certainly, it didn't reveal her position or rank. Ray scoffed, handing it back. "You'd best be careful around here," Ray said, his tone threatening. "If you're planning to meet someone, do it quick. We don't want any trouble." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. She said nothing, just nodded, turned on her heel, and walked toward an apartment complex. Ray stared after her, adrenaline churning in his gut for reasons he couldn't name. As he returned to his cruiser, he tapped the steering wheel in annoyance. Something about that woman doesn't feel right. He noted her license plate number for further investigation. Little did Ray know that this seemingly casual encounter was about to unspool into a life-changing confrontation. He had set events in motion that would soon bring to light all the prejudices, lies, and moral corruption lurking beneath his badge, and the quiet power in Naomi's eyes. He would soon learn just how much authority she truly wielded. That evening, Officer Ray Phillips walked into the Riverbend Police Department's break room, still bristling from his strange encounter. The day's humidity clung to him, and sweat stains darkened the armpits of his uniform. A few of his fellow officers milled about, microwaving leftover dinners or making coffee for the start of a long night shift. Sergeant Melissa Carmichael, an upright and by-the-book officer, noted Ray's scowl from across the room. She'd worked with him for years and knew when he was wound up. "Bad day, Ray?" He shrugged, taking a styrofoam cup of coffee from the communal pot. "Just the usual nonsense in Cedar Heights," he replied curtly. Melissa sipped her coffee and eyed him over the rim of her cup. "Something tells me you're not talking about traffic stops. You look like you've seen a ghost." Ray grunted. He wasn't about to admit he was rattled by a single encounter. "Just a woman who rubbed me the wrong way," he finally said. "She was too polished for that neighborhood, like she didn't belong. I can't stand these outsiders coming in and stirring up trouble." Melissa's expression tightened. She knew Ray's code words: outsiders, didn't belong, thinly veiled references to race or status. And while prejudice was often whispered rather than shouted in their department, she was one of the few who wouldn't ignore it. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Don't go making problems for yourself." "We've got bigger fish to fry," he scoffed, gulping his coffee. "I'm not the one making problems. The department is too soft these days." Melissa glanced around. Two younger officers were playing on their phones. Another was rummaging in the fridge. No one seemed to be listening, but she lowered her voice anyway. "You really want that kind of heat on you? Remember, the new chief is coming down on biased policing. His directives have come straight from the top, apparently from the Department of Homeland Security's Civil Rights Division. We don't need the feds breathing down our necks." The mention of the Department of Homeland Security momentarily made Ray's eyes flicker. He'd heard rumors that someone from the DHS was auditing local law enforcement on civil rights compliance. Could that woman have something to do with it? No way, he told himself, shaking off the idea. He couldn't see how a single random woman in Cedar Heights could be linked to such high-level oversight. "All I'm saying," continued Melissa, "is watch your step." He snorted, tossing the empty cup in the trash and walking out without another word. Meanwhile, in a locked office 3 doors down, Deputy Chief Alexander Morse mulled over a set of emails flagged with high importance. One was from the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, a notice about an upcoming workshop, and a site visit. Another email included the name Naomi Davenport, singled out as a key DHS official overseeing an initiative to address systemic biases in police departments. The email declared that Mrs. Davenport would be in Riverbend for several weeks, conducting interviews and audits. Morse rubbed his temples. He'd had enough trouble controlling the narrative whenever allegations of misconduct arose. Their small city was under a microscope ever since a high-profile lawsuit last year. The last thing he needed was a federal official who might have the power to dig into every corner of the department. He picked up the phone, dialing Sergeant Carmichael. "Melissa, can you step into my office?" "Yes, sir. On my way," came her prompt reply. Within a minute she was there, shutting the door behind her. Morse pointed to the email on his screen. "We're about to have DHS on our doorstep, specifically someone named Naomi Davenport. From what I hear, she's serious about rooting out discriminatory practices. I want you to make sure the officers understand the gravity of this. Any slip-ups, any racist comments, any illegal stops or arrests, and we'll be under federal investigation." Melissa nodded, thinking of Ray among others. "Yes, sir. I'll address it." "Do we know when she's arriving?" "She's already in town," Morse said, his expression grim. "I'm told she arrived earlier today. The site visit officially starts next week, but she might do unscheduled rounds before then." Melissa's heart sank. Ray could have already crossed paths with her. "I'll keep an eye on our people." Morse dismissed her with a wave and she left, her mind already spinning with scenarios of potential conflicts. Officer Ray Phillips was a ticking time bomb. If he'd had any interaction with Miss Davenport, it could spell major trouble, not just for Ray, but for the department as a whole. Naomi Davenport's day had been busier than she let on when Officer Phillips rudely stopped her. As a high-ranking official within the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Naomi carried significant weight. She'd come to Riverbend to assess compliance with federal guidelines on racial profiling and to investigate a string of complaints against the local police force. She was no stranger to suspicion or to being pulled over for looking out of place. Despite her polished appearance and professional demeanor, Naomi knew how deep racial biases could run. However, she rarely encountered such blatant disrespect from the first moment of contact. She'd been approached with suspicion many times. She'd even come to expect it, but Ray Phillips's hostility set off warning bells in her mind. After leaving the confrontation, Naomi had proceeded into the Cedar Heights apartment complex to meet with a local community leader, Grace Turner. Grace was an elderly woman who ran a youth outreach program and had reached out to DHS about the uptick in unjustified stops in her neighborhood. Grace's program was a focal point of Naomi's mission in Riverbend, to gather first-hand accounts of the policing issues. Naomi knocked on the door of apartment 12B. A tired but warm-eyed Grace invited her inside. The living room was modest, with faded wallpaper and mismatched furniture, but it radiated warmth. A group of teenagers sat around a small table, flipping through textbooks and worksheets, homework help for kids who had nowhere else to study peacefully. "Ms. Davenport, thank you for coming," Grace said, offering her a seat. "These kids can't stay in the public library long after school, and sometimes they can't go home early either. This place is our sanctuary." Naomi smiled. "It's a pleasure to be here. I admire what you're doing for these young people. Let's talk about the kind of issues you've been facing with the local police." Grace took a breath. "We've had random vehicle stops, ID checks with no cause, and sometimes even harassment. Many kids here are afraid to walk to the corner store after dark. They say if they do, the cops will question them or worse. This is no way for them to live." Naomi's mind jumped back to her own unsettling stop earlier in the day. She nodded. "I understand. We're compiling data on all these complaints. The Department of Homeland Security, in partnership with the Department of Justice, is serious about this. If the local police department can't remedy these issues, they could face federal oversight." Grace's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you, Mrs. Davenport. The kids here have bright futures, but not if they're always looking over their shoulders in fear of the very people who are supposed to protect them." They spoke for nearly 2 hours, diving into details of day-to-day challenges. As they wrapped up, Naomi noticed the tension in Grace's expression soften, like someone who'd finally been heard. Naomi promised to follow up and return for community meetings. On her way back to the SUV, Naomi's thoughts drifted to the officer who had stopped her. She didn't want to jump to conclusions about Ray Phillips, but she also couldn't ignore the possibility that he might embody the very reason she was here. She made a mental note to keep an eye out for his name in the department's records. "If I see him again, I'll see if he treats me any differently when he learns who I am." The next few days were spent in rigorous meetings. Naomi introduced herself to city officials, including Deputy Chief Morse. He tried to be cordial, but was clearly nervous. She took copious notes, asked pointed questions, and left no stone unturned. Everywhere she went, a quiet storm of anticipation seemed to follow. The entire force knew that a DHS official was on site, but few had seen her face yet. And that was just how Naomi liked it. In a briefing with Deputy Chief Morse and other leaders, Naomi outlined her approach. She wanted officer ride-alongs, desk reviews of policies, and interviews with internal affairs. "We'll start next week," she announced, handing out a schedule. "I'll also be inviting community members to share their stories. Full transparency is key. The Department of Homeland Security takes these issues seriously." Morse nodded, swallowing hard. "We understand, Mrs. Davenport. We'll cooperate fully." Naomi gave him a polite smile. Internally, she braced herself. She'd done enough oversight work to know that full cooperation was rarely the reality, especially if there were deep-seated issues within the department. Still, she hoped they'd surprise her. As the meeting ended and the group dispersed, Morse lingered behind. "Miss Davenport, if you need anything, information, a guide around the station, just let me know." She studied him, noting his slightly sweaty brow. "I appreciate that. I will certainly let you know." Unbeknownst to either of them, Officer Ray Phillips was outside in the hallway, catching a brief glimpse of Naomi through a partially open door. He recognized her immediately, his heart skipping a beat. "That's the same woman, in my precinct, talking to my boss." He ducked out of sight before she could notice him. Walking away, Ray felt a chill creep up his spine. Who the hell is she? He wondered, adrenaline fueling a wave of paranoid thoughts. The next time they crossed paths, he wouldn't be able to brush her off with intimidation. And he was already questioning if he'd gone too far in their first encounter, if he'd stepped so far outside the law that it could land him in trouble. But for now, he kept his distance, telling himself he could still manage the situation somehow. The weekend arrived, giving Ray some distance from the tension at the precinct. He spent his Saturday at home, a modest single-story house in a quiet suburb just outside Riverbend. Old sports trophies lined the mantel, relics of a high school football career that never went anywhere. A faded photograph of his late father, also a police officer, hung in the hallway. It was from his father that Ray inherited both a sense of duty and a streak of unchecked bias. Ray's wife, Claire, was out running errands. Alone in the house, he paced the living room, replaying the moment he'd spotted Naomi in the precinct corridor. He couldn't shake the fear that she might have recognized him, that she could be building a case against him. With each thought, his stomach twisted in knots. He turned on the TV, hoping to distract himself, but an endless loop of national news about police misconduct only fueled his anxiety. Finally, he grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at the name Officer Becker, a friend who worked in records. "Maybe I can find out who exactly Naomi Davenport is." He dialed Becker's number. "Yeah, Ray?" came Becker's voice, crackling slightly. "Hey man, off duty, right? Listen, I need a favor." Becker was silent for a moment. "You know the rules about pulling personal info, Ray. This is important. It's about that DHS lady who's poking around. I want to know what her role is, how big she is in the chain of command." Becker let out a sigh. "You're playing with fire." "Just do it, please. Run her name through any open channels we have. You can claim it's for a background check. She's a potential witness or something." He paused, lowering his voice as though someone might overhear. "I just need to know what she's capable of. I've got a hunch she's trouble." A long pause ensued. Then Becker said, "Fine, but you owe me big time. I'll let you know what I find." Ray ended the call, exhaling heavily. He told himself it was just a precaution. Better safe than sorry. If she's after me, I need to know. That evening, while Ray tried to relax with a beer and a football game, Becker texted him, "Davenport is high-level DHS, focused on civil rights. She's got authority to open investigations. Big fish." Ray's beer suddenly tasted flat. His pulse pounded in his ears. If Naomi filed a complaint about their encounter in Cedar Heights, she had the clout to push it. "Damn it," he swore under his breath. He set the bottle down and raked his hands through his hair. "I have to be careful. If she tries to throw me under the bus, I'll fight back." He sat for a moment, then typed a reply to Becker. "Thanks. Keep me posted if anything else comes up." On Monday morning, Naomi Davenport officially started her site visits. Her first stop was the Riverbend Police Department's watch briefing, where officers gathered to discuss daily assignments. Dressed in a tailored black suit, she joined Deputy Chief Morse at the front of the room. The energy in the room was tense, every officer on their best behavior, or at least trying to be. Morse cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is Miss Naomi Davenport from the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. She's here to conduct a thorough review of our practices per federal guidelines." Naomi looked over the assembled officers, maintaining a calm but authoritative demeanor. Her gaze swept across the room, and for a split second it landed on Ray Phillips. Their eyes met, and she recognized him instantly. A flicker of surprise, perhaps even indignation, crossed her face, though she masked it swiftly with professional composure. Ray, meanwhile, felt like a spotlight was shining directly on him. "I want you all to understand," Naomi began, her voice steady, "that my role is not to dismantle this department. My goal is to ensure that the rights of citizens and officers alike are protected, and that we're all working within legal and ethical boundaries. I will be observing your interactions, reviewing body cam footage, and meeting with some of you individually. It's a chance for us to identify best practices and correct any problematic ones." An uneasy rustle moved through the room. Some officers nodded respectfully, others kept their faces neutral. Ray pretended not to notice Naomi's direct stare, but sweat began to bead at his temple. After the briefing, Naomi stepped aside to talk to a few sergeants and lieutenants. Ray slipped out, hoping to avoid her. He almost made it to the hallway when he heard her voice behind him. "Officer Phillips, may I have a word?" He turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am?" Naomi motioned for them to step into a quieter corner. "We met briefly in Cedar Heights." He swallowed hard. "Yes, I remember." Her tone was measured. "I just want to make sure everything is clear from that day. You asked me for ID as part of some suspicious activity call. I'd like to check the record on that call. Could you point me to the incident number?" Ray felt a jolt of panic. There had been no official call logged, just his own invention. He didn't want to outright confess that he lied. He also knew that refusing to answer might raise more suspicion. "I'll have to look it up," he said, trying to sound casual. "I don't have it memorized." She nodded, unfazed. "Please do. I'll be reviewing dispatch logs later this week. I'm sure I'll see it there." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. A small, polite smile curved on Naomi's lips. "Have a good day, Officer Phillips." She turned and walked away. Ray stood there, fists clenched, feeling cornered. This is bad, he realized, thoughts racing. If I can't provide an incident number, she'll know I made it up. She could accuse me of an unlawful stop. He bit his lip so hard he tasted blood. Over the next few days, Ray frantically tried to cover his tracks. He considered filing a fake incident report, but that would create a paper trail he might not be able to maintain. He thought about bribing or threatening a dispatcher to invent a call record, but even he wasn't that far gone. He knew how easily that could blow up. As the tension mounted, Ray's nerves frayed. Meanwhile, Naomi busied herself with ride-alongs, listening intently to how officers communicated with dispatch, how they interacted with citizens, and how they carried themselves under stress. She also requested random body cam footage from the past few months. Slowly, a pattern emerged. A handful of officers, including Ray Phillips, consistently logged more frequent stops of black residents than any other demographic. There were also small but telling details in the conversation captured on body cams that hinted at racial bias. Though Naomi held no illusions about the complexity of these issues, she was gathering enough evidence to at least suggest a formal inquiry. At best, the department would need retraining and a policy overhaul. At worst, certain officers could face disciplinary actions or even charges. Tension reached a breaking point a week later when the City Council convened a hearing to address ongoing civil rights concerns. Naomi was slated to testify about her findings so far. Several community leaders, including Grace Turner, were also invited to speak. The police department, feeling the heat, sent Deputy Chief Morse and a few selected officers. Ray Phillips, to his dismay, was among them. The hearing took place in a cavernous municipal chamber with rows of seating and a raised platform for the council members. Bright lights glared onto the speaker's table, where a microphone sat ominously, waiting for each speaker to pour out the truth, or whatever version of it they wanted to present. Grace Turner spoke first, detailing the problems in Cedar Heights. She recounted stories of teens being harassed and residents being pulled over for minor or non-existent infractions. "We need real change," she concluded, voice trembling with emotion. Applause from the audience rippled through the room. Next, Naomi Davenport took the mic. She outlined the preliminary data she'd gathered, citing Department of Homeland Security guidelines on racial profiling. She mentioned potential constitutional violations and recommended immediate corrective measures. Her voice was steady, calm, but it carried the weight of federal authority. The council members nodded solemnly, some even scribbling notes. When it was Deputy Chief Morse's turn, he gave a carefully worded statement. "We hear the concerns, and we're working with Miss Davenport to address them. Our department is committed to fairness and professionalism." He spoke in measured tones, obviously trying to appease both the council and the public. Naomi studied him, not entirely convinced but willing to see if he'd follow through. Then came the bombshell. One of the council members asked if any officer involved in the questionable stops was present and willing to give their side. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Ray tensed in his seat. Morse shot him a warning glance, but the council member specifically invited Officer Ray Phillips to speak. With the eyes of the room on him, Ray had no choice but to step up to the microphone. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the hot lights. He cleared his throat. "I'm Officer Phillips. I've been with the Riverbend Police Department for 15 years. He paused, scanning the faces in the audience, then letting his gaze linger on Naomi. "I'm proud of my record. I've served this community honorably." He avoided looking at Grace Turner, who sat watching intently in the second row. "As for allegations of racial profiling, I can only speak for myself. I respond to calls based on dispatch reports and citizen complaints. Any stops I make are rooted in probable cause. I do not and have never targeted anyone based on race." Naomi's gaze hardened. She glanced at her notes, seeing data that directly contradicted his statement. Still, she kept her composure, waiting. A council member, an older man in a grey suit, leaned forward. "Officer Phillips, you mentioned your actions are based on dispatch calls. Can you explain the stop you made of Ms. Davenport a week ago? What was the dispatch call about?" Ray's stomach churned, but he forced a calm expression. "This is it. We received a report of a suspicious individual matching Ms. Davenport's description," he lied. "I followed procedure to verify her identification, that's all." Naomi frowned, but let him continue. She knew this was perjury if placed under oath, but here he was, freely lying in front of city officials. The council member eyed him with mild skepticism. "Do you recall the call number or specifics of who reported the suspicious individual?" Ray shifted uncomfortably. The details were minimal. It was an anonymous tip. Dispatch logs could confirm the exact time. From her seat, Naomi could barely contain her indignation. She made a quick note on her pad. "He's lying." She reminded herself that soon enough the official records would surface. Let him bury himself. The council thanked Ray for his testimony and dismissed him. As he returned to his seat, his heart pounded. He knew Naomi was seething at his false account, but for the moment he felt a twisted sense of relief. At least it's on the record now. If she tries to push her story, it's my word against hers. Yet a gnawing sense of dread told him that once the logs were reviewed, this ruse would crumble. A few days after the hearing, Naomi obtained the official dispatch logs for the date and time Ray claimed he'd responded to a suspicious person call. As expected, there was no such call, anonymous or otherwise. She also got hold of Ray's body cam footage from that day. Conveniently, Ray's camera had been turned off during his interaction with her, another violation of department policy. Everything pointed to a deliberate attempt to hide the truth. Naomi decided it was time to confront this head-on. She arranged a formal meeting with Deputy Chief Morse, Sergeant Carmichael, and the head of Internal Affairs, Lieutenant Jordan Riley. Once they were seated around a long dark wood table in the department's conference room, Naomi laid out her evidence. First, she said, distributing copies of the dispatch logs, there was no call matching Officer Phillips's claim. Second, his body cam footage for that time period is suspiciously missing. Third, I have at least one witness who can testify that Officer Phillips had no legitimate reason for the stop in Cedar Heights. Morse's face paled. I understand. We will handle this internally. Naomi gave him a tight smile. That's not sufficient at this point, Deputy Chief. We're past internal discipline. There's the possibility that Officer Phillips committed perjury in a municipal hearing. We're also looking at a pattern of racially biased policing. The Department of Homeland Security has already signaled we might need to escalate this. Sergeant Carmichael, who'd long harbored concerns about Ray's behavior, sighed. I always told him to be careful. Now it's gone way beyond that. Lieutenant Riley placed her hands on the table. Our Internal Affairs Department will pursue the matter. We'll investigate fully. Officer Phillips can either come clean or face the consequences. Morse ran a hand over his balding head. I'll notify him immediately. He'll be placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Naomi nodded. Though she was pleased with this development, she knew Ray wasn't the only problem. Her data suggested systemic issues. Still, one major step toward accountability might catalyze further reform. Within an hour of that meeting, Ray received the call from Morse. Phillips, turn in your badge and gun. You're on administrative leave. The tone was icy. We have evidence you lied under oath. Expect a summons soon. Ray felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You can't do this to me, he yelled. I gave 15 years to this department. You're going to trust the word of some outsider? Morse's reply was stern. We have logs, Ray, and the logs don't lie. Turn in your equipment first thing in the morning. Shaking with rage, Ray ended the call. That damn woman, he seethed. She's ruining my life. His thoughts spiraled. He could try to fight the leave, but all the evidence was stacked against him. There was no record of his alleged call. He had nothing to prove his story. I should have made that phony dispatch call, or maybe forced the dispatcher to log it, he thought bitterly. But it was too late. News traveled fast. By the next day, the local media had caught wind of the investigation. Headlines ran, Riverbend officer accused of perjury in civil rights probe. The story painted a picture of a long-time officer who'd allegedly fabricated a call to justify stopping a black DHS official. Social media was ablaze, with many calling for Ray's immediate termination. Others defended him blindly, claiming it was a political witch hunt. Ray sat at home, phone buzzing incessantly with calls from reporters. He ignored them all. Claire, his wife, was in tears. This is humiliating, she said, pacing their living room. What are we going to do if you lose your job? He stared at her with a cold, distant gaze. I'm not losing my job. I'll fight this. I'll expose them for making me a scapegoat. Davenport must have an agenda. He clenched his jaw, each word dripping with resentment. Claire saw the fury in his eyes and realized how far gone he was. Ray, what if you were wrong? Maybe you shouldn't have what? Done my job? He snapped. I'm not going to roll over. He grabbed his keys and stormed out. He drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up outside the Riverbend Police Department. The building glowed under floodlights, a symbol of everything he once believed in. Now it felt like a fortress that had exiled him. He considered barging in to confront Morse or Carmichael, but realized that would be pointless. They had turned their backs on him. It's all her fault, he kept repeating in his head. That woman is behind all of this. Meanwhile, Naomi Davenport was hosting a public meeting at a local community center. She explained the importance of accountability and invited citizens to share their experiences. The turnout was large, with many thanking her for pushing the department to address racial profiling. Yet Naomi felt no personal triumph. She'd seen this story play out in other cities, a single officer scapegoated while systemic issues lingered. She was determined not to let that happen here. Deputy Chief Morse convened a meeting with some of his command staff. The tension was palpable. He rubbed his temples, clearly under immense stress. "We need a plan," he said, glancing around at the stern faces of his sergeants and lieutenants. "We can't let the entire department be vilified because of one officer's actions." Sergeant Carmichael leaned forward. "But it's not just one officer, sir. Ray was the most blatant, but we have data showing a pattern. Mrs. Davenport isn't going to stop with him." Morse sighed. "I know, but the city council is panicking. They'll want quick action. Internal Affairs will investigate Phillips, and we'll likely have to let him go to show we're serious. Then we need to implement some immediate training and oversight measures to appease DHS." Lieutenant Riley stepped in. Letting Phillips go might be the easy part. The real challenge is changing a culture that's been ingrained for years. Morse spread his hands. "We have to start somewhere. If we don't, the feds might impose a consent decree on us, like they did in Ferguson years ago. That means long-term federal oversight. It's costly and humiliating." The room fell silent. Everyone recognized the gravity of the situation. Riverbend was at a crossroads, and how they handled Ray Phillips would set the tone for everything else. 2 weeks after his administrative leave began, Ray Phillips received an official summons to testify under oath again, this time in a legal proceeding that involved potential civil rights violations. The hearing was scheduled in a federal building downtown, with a judge presiding. Naomi Davenport was expected to testify as a key witness, along with other department officials. The day of the hearing dawned cold and drizzly, matching Ray's mood. He arrived at the imposing granite building in a wrinkled suit. Claire had refused to attend, too distraught by the ongoing media frenzy. Inside, the hallway smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Uniformed federal marshals stood guard at the entrance to the courtroom. Ray's lawyer, a public defender assigned at the last minute, met him outside the door. "We'll do our best," she said, "but the evidence is strong. If you have anything to come clean about, now's the time." Ray frowned. "I'm not admitting to anything. I did nothing wrong." She gave him a tight, sympathetic smile. "Let's head in." The room was sterile, bright lights reflecting off polished wood. A handful of spectators sat in the back. At one table, Naomi Davenport sat with a DHS legal representative. She was poised, reviewing documents calmly. Ray avoided looking at her. The judge, a stern-faced woman with wire-rimmed glasses, opened the proceedings. "We are here to determine if Officer Ray Phillips engaged in unlawful policing practices and then provided false testimony under oath." She glanced at Ray, then at the attorneys. "We'll hear from the Department of Homeland Security and then Officer Phillips and his counsel." Naomi testified first. She presented dispatch logs, citing the absence of any call that matched Ray's claim. She noted his track record of disproportionate stops involving black residents. Finally, she recounted their encounter in Cedar Heights, stating, "At no time did Officer Phillips have a legitimate reason to stop me. He provided no explanation besides a fabricated anonymous tip." Ray's lawyer cross-examined Naomi, attempting to sow doubt about the thoroughness of her investigation, but Naomi remained calm, responding with precise details. "We have the entire day's dispatch log. There was no relevant call. This was a blatant misuse of authority." Next came the department's own internal affairs findings. Lieutenant Riley offered a somber account of the missing body cam footage, pointing out policy violations. The device was manually turned off at approximately the same time frame of the interaction. Officer Phillips gave no acceptable reason for this. Finally, Ray was called to the stand. The judge reminded him he was under oath. His lawyer gently asked him to describe the events. Once again, Ray repeated his story. The anonymous tip, the suspicious figure. He tried to sound confident, but his voice wavered. When pressed on the missing body cam footage, he dodged. The camera must have malfunctioned. The judge's gaze was skeptical. Officer Phillips, if this alleged anonymous tip existed, how do you explain that there is no record of it in the dispatch logs? Ray's throat went dry. Maybe it was called in directly to my cell phone or something. I don't remember. His lawyer winced. The judge's eyes narrowed. That's highly unusual. Your personal cell phone would not be the standard channel for official dispatch. Are you saying you took an anonymous call on your personal phone and then decided to stop Ms. Davenport without logging it? Ray forced a swallow. Yes, that's possible. The judge glanced at the DHS attorney, who looked incredulous. Very well, the judge said. We'll move forward with the review of Officer Phillips's phone records if necessary. Ray's facade cracked slightly as he realized the deeper hole he was digging. If phone records were subpoenaed, his lie would be laid bare, and lying under oath was perjury, potentially a criminal offense. The hearing ended with the judge stating that she would consider all evidence and issue a ruling in the coming weeks. Naomi walked out of the courtroom, feeling a mix of frustration and pity. She'd seen plenty of officers lie to save their skin, but Ray's desperation was tangible. Still, the harm he'd done couldn't be ignored. The system needs to correct itself, she reminded herself, even if that correction is painful. Within 2 weeks, the judge issued a scathing rebuke of Ray Phillips's testimony. In her written statement, she noted multiple inconsistencies, blatant contradictions, and a complete lack of evidence to support his claims. She recommended that the local district attorney consider perjury charges and that the police department proceed with disciplinary actions. It didn't take long for Deputy Chief Morse to call Ray into his office. Sitting behind a heavy wooden desk, Morse looked more tired than ever. Ray, sweaty palms clasped together, tried to maintain a facade of dignity. Ray, the judge's recommendation is explicit, Morse began, voice low and grim. With all that's happened, we have no choice. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. A bolt of panic shot through Ray. No, you can't. I've given everything to this department. Morse shook his head, genuinely pained. I don't have a choice. You lied under oath, Ray. That's a betrayal of the badge, and the department is under immense scrutiny. We have to show we're serious about reform. You're throwing me to the wolves, Ray hissed, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. He stood up abruptly, fists clenched. This is Davenport's doing. She's out to get me. Morse stood as well, a steely resolve in his gaze. No, Ray. You did this to yourself. Now get out. As Ray stormed out, he nearly collided with Naomi Davenport in the hallway. For a moment they locked eyes. She saw the fury, the humiliation, the hatred swirling within him, but she also sensed a broken man who had been undone by his own prejudice and lies. Ray said nothing. He shoved past her and walked away, shoulders trembling with rage. Naomi took a deep breath, part of her relieved that accountability had been served, another part deeply saddened that such a downfall was necessary. For several weeks after his termination, Ray Phillips sank into a bitter, angry stupor. Without a steady income, he argued constantly with Claire. Bills piled up, the mortgage loomed. Former colleagues distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with a disgraced officer. Some quietly sympathized, but couldn't publicly support him. One day, as Ray was leaving a local grocery store, he was approached by a group of teenage boys. They recognized him as the cop who'd harassed them in the past, the man now infamous for lying under oath. They sneered and hurled insults, filming him with their phones. Ray, humiliated, hurried away. I used to command respect. Now I'm a laughingstock, he fumed, tears burning his eyes. He applied for private security positions, but every time the background check was run, his perjury scandal popped up. Doors slammed in his face. With each rejection, his resentment toward Naomi Davenport grew, though logically he knew he had no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, Naomi's work in Riverbend continued. Changes were implemented, new training, stricter oversight, improved community outreach. Morale in the department was cautious but hopeful. The city council was relieved not to face a full-blown federal intervention, as Naomi found the leadership willing to make meaningful reforms. One Monday afternoon, Naomi stopped by Grace Turner's youth program. Grace greeted her warmly, and they chatted about how the kids were doing. On her way out, Naomi spotted a figure slouched against a brick wall, partially hidden in the shadows of a side alley. A closer look revealed a disheveled Ray Phillips, rummaging in his backpack for something. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He glanced up, instantly recognizing her. "Came to gloat?" he sneered, voice slurred. Naomi paused, her heart softening despite everything. "No," she answered gently. "I'm here for community business." He gave a derisive laugh. "Yeah, you're the big DHS official cleaning up the town. Congratulations, you won." She studied him for a moment, thinking of how much he'd lost. "It's not about winning or losing, Ray. It's about justice." He snorted. "Justice?" He spat at the ground. "You don't know what I've been through." Naomi inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "I understand your anger, but I also understand the fear you put into people. Lives you disrupted." Ray blinked, face flushing with guilt and humiliation. For a moment it looked like he might say something remorseful. Instead, he mumbled a curse under his breath. Without another word, Naomi walked away, a swirl of mixed feelings churning inside her, relief that change was happening, pity for a man undone by his own hatred, and a lingering sadness for a system that had failed to check him sooner. Months passed, and the Riverbend Police Department underwent a transformation. Under Deputy Chief Morse's direction, and with Naomi Davenport's ongoing guidance, the department revised its training protocols to emphasize de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and community engagement. Sergeant Carmichael stepped into a leadership role for these reforms. She collaborated with Grace Turner's program to create youth outreach initiatives that bridged gaps between officers and local teenagers. Community trust, though fragile, began to rebuild. Complaints of harassment decreased and transparency increased. The local media highlighted these positive strides. Naomi continued to monitor the progress, filing reports with DHS that showed Riverbend as an example of how internal change could happen without a full federal takeover, provided the department was genuinely committed. Officer Ray Phillips became a cautionary tale, lectured about in ethics training as an example of what not to do. Most of the department moved on, reluctant to dwell on his story. Still, rumors circulated about Ray's downward spiral, unemployment, legal woes, and possible criminal charges for perjury. Some speculated he might serve time if the district attorney pursued the case aggressively. Others said he had fled town in search of a fresh start. Only a few close observers knew the truth. He was still in Riverbend, lost and bitter. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Naomi's final day in Riverbend approached. She'd come to the police station to wrap up last-minute formalities before returning to Washington, D.C. On her way out, she found a moment with Sergeant Carmichael. The sergeant expressed her gratitude. "Ms. Davenport, I just want to thank you for helping us see what we needed to fix." Naomi smiled softly. "I just provided the mirror. You all chose to see the reflection and change it." As she left the station, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey. One man's downfall had triggered a departmental reckoning. Lives were transformed, some for better, some for worse. But progress had been made. Meanwhile, Ray Phillips sat alone at a battered diner on the outskirts of town, staring into a half-empty cup of coffee. He barely recognized himself anymore. His pride was gone, replaced by a quiet bitterness. But somewhere deep in his heart, he felt the flicker of regret, like an ember reminding him that he could have chosen a different path. That ember might lead him to accountability one day, or it might wither away, drowned by resentment. For now, karma had landed its blow, and Officer Ray Phillips was left to face the wreckage. The black woman he once tried to intimidate under the guise of law had turned out to be his direct superior in matters of homeland security and civil rights. He had lied under oath only to be exposed and humiliated. The illusions of power he clung to as a badge-carrying officer were stripped away, leaving the harsh truth of his own prejudice and its devastating consequences. Yet, amidst the fallout, there shone a ray of hope for the people of Riverbend. A hope that the reforms sparked by Naomi Davenport and the community's perseverance would serve as a lasting shield against the return of such injustice. And in that hope, a clear lesson emerged: that those who misuse authority to oppress others will, in time, face the weight of their own actions and the reckoning they so rightfully deserve. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey of truth and consequences, where one man's prejudice and deception collided with the unwavering resolve for justice. From the small sparks of tension in Cedar Heights to the seismic shift in the Riverbend Police Department, we've witnessed how lies can unravel even the most carefully constructed facades, and how genuine accountability can pave the way for meaningful change. If this story moved you, or made you think about the power of integrity, please like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a dramatic tale of justice served, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Together, let's spread stories that challenge our perspectives, highlight the importance of truth, and remind us all that no one is above accountability. Thank you, and we'll see you in our next narrative adventure. Until then, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and stay inspired.